friends will say that I don't make waves. It takes me ages to react.
Yeah.
I didn't react until the DI. It took me 5 days to react when he said that we're going to send, we need to take advice because we don't know what act this falls under.
Celia, you have a heart-rending story to tell us, really, about your late partner's experience and your experience with the Aneurin Bevan Health Trust.
Well, Brian wasn't a well man. He had COPD and he'd had an admission in 2016 and he'd been written off basically, but he made a complete recovery. So in 2017 we lived life normally, went on holiday to Mallorca, but in August he developed pains in the ribs and we went to the MAU and they took bloods. They said you need to have a CT scan just to rule out anything, which was done on the 25th of August, and we didn't get the results till the 6th of September, but it was all clear. There was no sign of any cancer. He was told that he may have a hiatus hernia and would be referred for an endoscopy. The consideration of a camera test was the actual words written down. And within probably 10 or 11 days, he suddenly had low saturations. He was accustomed to taking his saturations every day, having COPD. And I called an ambulance when they went quite low. I regret it. I actually think that possibly I should have driven him to UHW. And he was in A&E, and he was told he was going to be discharged. But he was actually admitted with a chest infection, and we weren't told that he'd got low sodium as well until 1720. And he wanted to discharge himself. He was found to have capacity to do that, but we didn't have home oxygen. I persuaded him to stay, thinking it the best thing, and he stayed.
What date was that?
That was the 18th of September.
18th of September.
Nothing apparently untoward happened. I did visit and brought him some things in.
Just to recap, tests were done at the end of August and there was no cancer found. But by the 27th of September, there was a tumour the size of a tennis ball.
Well, there's more to it than that, because the first death certificate said that he died of respiratory failure. I was suddenly demoted. I wasn't next of kin. I wasn't allowed to collect the death certificate, even though I was told to do that. And Brian's brother, who he rarely spoke to, went in probably a week after Brian died. He was told that I had given unprescribed furosemide. He insisted on a post-mortem, and that is how the 6 centimetre, which is the size of a tennis ball, tumour in the esophagus was found.
Right.
So the second death certificate said aspiration pneumonia as a result of esophageal tumour.
Right. Okay. So you were accused of giving unprescribed medication, which actually turned out to be prescribed.
Yeah.
And you didn't actually give it, did you?
I visited for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. On the 25th of September, I was called into the office, having just walked on the ward. There was another doctor there, and there were 4 people in this very small office, which was the size of a bathroom, and I was accused of giving him unprescribed furosemide. I mean, it was a fact that it was prescribed.
Yeah.
I obtained the prescriptions much later. I've got the box here. And they hadn't been hardly touched. Brian had actually, when I went through the notes later, much later, all too late, he'd actually said, look, I take my own medication. But they were insistent that this had been stopped, and I was told, oh, you can only visit for an hour tomorrow.
So how long were you living together?
Oh, 20 years-ish, but I'd known him since 1986.
So having lived with somebody for 20 years and having known them since 1986, after the death of your late partner, you were not classified as next of kin?
Only after he was dead.
Yeah, okay.
Well, it seemed, I was actually, the Ombudsman did a thorough investigation, and they noted that I was many things, like wife, friend, girlfriend, partner,
On the
carer.
records?
On the records.
Right.
I had a multitude of statuses.
Okay. So the day before your partner of 20 years died, you were only allowed to see him for an hour?
An hour that day, and I had to leave with the ward sister, Sister Z,
Yeah.
and she muttered something under her breath called DOLS, which is a deprivation of liberty order,
Yeah.
and that hadn't then been put in place, but that was put in place illegally because there was no capacity test done,
So what did that entail?
stopping him going anywhere.
Right.
They deprived him of his liberty.
And he wanted to leave.
He wanted to leave.
So he was kept in hospital against his will. You were not allowed to see him. What happened with the fluids?
He was dehydrated. I've got the fluid balance charts. I did take that up personally with the CEO. I didn't mention it to the Ombudsman because it was actually done by an advocate for me. I was too distressed to do the complaint. And she apologised and said, no, this is wrong. But it appeared that he was having less than 750 mils a day, sometimes less than 500 mils a day, and they weren't measuring output. And for somebody who's got COPD and a chest infection, fluids are really important.
So on some days he was given less than a pint of water.
Yep. And in fact, on the 26th, he had about an inch left in his jug, and it was thrown away in front of me, and he complained. And he had said that I have to come in because I will give him fluid.
Is that in the records?
That is in the records.
In the records. Okay.
Because I was too scared to go in.
So what they call the unprescribed drug was prescribed, and it was actually given to Brian by the hospital.
On the 18th, it was given by the hospital. So I don't know how they can say it wasn't prescribed.
And there's a box there with the label showing that it's a prescription.
I kept these, and he obviously wasn't taking them as prescribed. It says take 2 a day, because they're pretty much, he'd taken a third of what he was prescribed.
Okay. Was there an issue with an injection given in error?
Yep, he was. He'd had this medication before, but it was deemed not to be safe to be given due to his physical state, and it was given at 16:25. They admit that it was given in error, but there's no datix to say that this is an error. There's no near miss, which by law they're supposed to put down and note in their policy.
Yeah.
And he was dead 90 minutes later. Within half an hour, he was very short of breath. Within 50 minutes, he had unrecordable saturations. And within another 20 minutes, he was chain stoking, which literally means, you're dying.
Right.
And nobody rang me.
Nobody rang you?
No, nobody rang me. They rang the ward sister, Sister Z. And I was given different stories, so I was in shock.
So there was a misdiagnosis of cancer, which wasn't diagnosed. You were falsely accused of giving an unprescribed drug. You were not allowed to see your late partner. What was the effect on him?
Sadly, I don't know. He didn't look well when I saw him on the Tuesday. I came in and he said to me, we've only got a short time. That was the last time I saw him. And he looked a little bit yellow. There was a secondary in the liver.
Yeah.
The Ombudsman in his report says it seems unbelievable that they didn't realise how ill he was. And it seems that in harming me, maybe harm's the wrong word, but in stopping me visiting, they were actually harming the patient.
Yeah.
Because it's an infringement of Article 8 of the Human Rights Act, family life.
You obviously were and are distressed. Do you think it was distressing for your late partner?
The Ombudsman's report said that Brian should have been fast-tracked to an endoscopy. He should have been made aware of his diagnosis, and that he should have spent the last months, weeks, however long he had left, being able to have valuable conversations with loved ones, family, rather than die in such indignity without them even knowing.
So he was kept in a place where he wasn't allowed visitors?
For the last 24 hours of his life. And to make matters worse, on the 27th, which was the day he died, he was ringing me up, asking for me to get him out of the hospital.
Right.
And he was walking around the ward, which makes me think, well, you know, he's given this injection and then within 90 minutes he's dead.
Yeah.
There were recommendations made by the Ombudsman that the Health Board had to have a frank conversation with the coroner, but they didn't.
Do you have any evidence that they have?
No, because I've been emailed, and when they complied with the recommendations, they will email me, and I haven't had an email.
Okay.
They blamed it on the situation.
So what happened to the medical notes?
I have the medical notes, but how true they are, I don't know. I know there are falsified sheets in there. The Ombudsman's commented on the inconsistent, unreliable sheets. I've been sent a letter by the Data Protection Officer to say that the Ombudsman's report has to lie with Brian's notes, and the comments about the veracity of the notes has to be noted when reading the notes. But there is worse, actually, because on the 20th, and I only found this out 10 months later, on the 20th of September, the previous doctor, which was not the doctor who took over on the 25th, had filled in a do not resuscitate order,
right,
reversing his status from the 18th, saying that he was confused and had no relatives. And that, at the moment, is being looked at by the GMC.
It's incredible. So,
I mean, it was in the notes that he had many relatives, but there were at least 2 phone numbers.
But nobody called you?
Nobody called me. That was the 20th, and I didn't even know.
The police are now involved, aren't they?
I have made a complaint regarding the appalling care because of the dehydration, the lack of food, the lack of risk assessment, and the way he was treated, which to me falls under the Section 20 of the Criminal Justice and Courts Act 2015, which is brought in after the mid-staff's inquiry, and that applies to the care workers or nurses. Section 21 is the care provider, which would be a hospital or a care home.
Okay.
And it specifically states ill treatment and neglect. And the neglect just has to be reckless as regard to well-being.
So it's the Gwent police force looking at this?
They don't seem to know the law at the moment.
Why is that?
They weren't sure under which legislation it fell under. But having said that, if you or I walked onto a hospital ward, dehydrated a patient, didn't give them food, didn't make sure, falsified notes, we would be arrested probably.
So you have an officer investigating the case, and he doesn't know whether or not it's criminal?
He doesn't know whether there's criminality yet, but he hasn't even looked at the notes. Hasn't even looked at my submissions.
He couldn't tell you which part of the law it relates to?
No.
Okay.
And yet there have been several prosecutions, even locally, for falsification of notes and records.
So I understand that Gwent Police have been looking at this for almost a year.
Well, I wanted to wait until the Ombudsman's report came out. I did make a statement a year ago. So practically I stopped them until the beginning of the year. So we're going on 9 months.
Okay.
They had a difficulty in getting the unredacted notes and the duty rosters from the Health Board simply because the doctor in charge of Brian did not wish them to be seen.
So how does all this make you feel?
I feel that there's something being covered up, if they've nothing to hide, there should be transparency. Here are the notes, etc., etc. I did report 2 nurses to the NMC, and those 2 nurses counterattacked me with unsubstantiated complaints. And they were unsubstantiated.
Where do you go from here? How should it be resolved?
I would like a thorough police investigation.
So at the moment you don't think it's thorough?
Well, he hasn't even read the notes.
How do you know he hasn't read the notes?
He told me.
Right, okay.
And that was last Friday.
In terms of the wider concerns about health boards in Wales in general, what needs to change?
They actually need to have the CEOs be regulated by a regulatory body. Until that happens, they will brush things under the carpet. We all know the NHS is a wonderful thing, but there's some very rotten things that go on in the NHS, in Wales and in England too.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, I was treated as if I was a whistleblower. I feel that I was targeted and made to feel that I should back off.
Did you expect any of this?
No, I mean, I don't go into the hospital now, but I mean, I've been a nurse for 30 odd years. I've worked in Australia, I've worked in hospitals in Wales, and I've never in my entire life seen anything as awful as this.
So you were a nurse for 30 years and you've never seen anything like this?
Never in my life. In my wildest nightmares, I would never expect anything like that to happen. It seemed like that ward was in chaos. I'd like to think it was that ward in chaos. I wouldn't like to think the hospital was in chaos. But it is shocking. I was shocked. I was shocked the year before. There was inappropriate prescribing of end-of-life drugs. They had a lot of deaths on that ward, which I now possibly realise is a culture. People are expendable.
Well, I'm certainly going to be looking at this, contacting the Gwent Police, contacting the health board, and there's a way to go, but we will support you.
Yeah, I don't intend to let it drop. There needs to be justice, because it is for the greater good. This isn't just about Brian, it's about everybody else who happens to be in that hospital and is vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Anybody in a hospital is vulnerable when they're ill.
Okay.